In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. The strength to endure is a strength to inspire. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: resilience in the face of adversity, the power of purpose-driven living, and turning struggles into strengths. Our guest today is Terry Tucker, a former SWAT hostage negotiator, entrepreneur, cancer survivor, and author of Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. Terry's journey from law enforcement to battling terminal cancer has shaped a powerful philosophy on leadership, mindset, and finding purpose beyond success. His story will challenge you to redefine resilience, embrace the struggle, and live with an unwavering significance. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Terry Tucker, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I am great, Sam. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Thank you so much. And I read some of your books, and it's an honor to be able to platform you. To kick us off, please tell us more about Motivational Check.
Yeah, Motivational Check is the umbrella that I use for my speaking and for my writing, for my books and things like that. And the phrase actually came from one of the jobs I've had in my life is I was a police officer. So becoming a police officer, you usually have to go through a police academy. And I was a police officer in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I went through the Cincinnati, Ohio Police Academy. And Motivational Check was a phrase that our defensive tactics instructor gave us if we were just having one of those days. And we all have them. You know, you're tired, you're beat up. I mean, this guy was crazy. I mean, we would run to a fountain that had 6 inches of water on it and spend an hour doing push-ups and sit-ups in this water. And then we would run back all wet and everything like that. And so if you just were having one of those days, you could yell out Motivational Check. And we were the 84th recruit class. And so the rest of the class would respond by yelling out 84, just to let the person know you're not alone. We're all in this together. We're all hurting, and we're going to get through this together. And that's really important thing. I think law enforcement is a team, marketing is a team, sales is a team, all kinds of production is a team. We're all part of a team, whether it's our family, whether it's our business or something like that. And we wanted each other to know that, hey, you're never going to be alone. We're always going to be here for each other.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think that's a great place to start, actually, because you're obviously a man of many lives, and we'll get into that very, very shortly. When you're thinking about that portion of your life in law enforcement and obviously as a SWAT hostage, basically, negotiator, tell me more, please, about, I suppose, how did that kick off your journey in a way in which basically shaped the person that you are, and perhaps provide you with some of the tangible insight that was necessary for you to live the life that you live?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at my resume overall, it kind of looks like a Super Bowl went off in a room. You know, I mean, it's just all over the place. But I really wanted to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. My paternal grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories growing up that his mom told, my grandmother told, of that knock on the door. Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when I expressed that interest in going into law enforcement, following my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to lead. So when I graduated from college, honestly, Sam, I kind of had the first big major life decision that I faced because my father was dying of cancer. And I could have said, hey, Dad, I know you're dying. Sorry about that. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first two jobs were in business. I was in the marketing department at the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. And then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father. And then at 37 years old, made that major pivot in my life to become a police officer. And Sam, I'll end with this. One of the things I'm most proud of in my life is that I never let my dream die. You know, I could have said, hey, I'm making good money as a hospital administrator. I'll just stay here. But I gave all that up, certainly with the blessing of my family, to start in the police academy and work my way up in that form of employment. So I'm really happy I never did that. I did it late in life, but it's something I knew I was going to do.
Very interesting. And I love what Einstein had to say on this, actually, which is adversity introduces a man to himself. When you think about kind of like the various, I suppose, professional evolution that you had, all these diverse roles, you named some of those as well yourself. I'd love if we can explore the ability that you have to adapt, grow, and perhaps thrive in face of adversity as well. Was that something that was taught directly from your parents? How do you think the roots of that, I suppose, virtue came from for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think it came from my parents. I have two brothers. We were all college athletes. I have one brother who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. But sports was our entire life growing up. And my mom and dad used to do what I would call divide and conquer parenting, where, you know, I'd have a game at 5 o'clock on a Thursday night at this location, and my brother would have a practice at 5 o'clock on Thursday night at another location. So dad's coming with me, mom's going with my brother, and our whole family revolved around sports. But my parents taught my brothers and I the importance of family, of loving each other, of caring for each other, of supporting each other. And my brothers and I are still, to this day, very, very close. And and my parents were never like, service is something that you should do in your life. But my parents modeled what service looked like. And both of my brothers are in high school education and have been for a number of decades. And yeah, I had some private sector jobs, but if you asked me what I did for a living, I would tell you I was a police officer. It was that part of service, of giving back for the things that we had been given in our lives that was really important, I think, for my brothers and I.
Beautiful. And I love that philosophy, because obviously what we know, not only from the theory of evolution, but just for simple scientific observations, is the one that are able to adapt are the one that are able to survive just the way it is. And I think from your story, that's the main takeaway that I had, was just the sheer resilience and, I suppose, adaptability, and how you were able to mold yourself to the environments in a way in which you can have a very meaningful living through it. One of the, I suppose, the battle of purpose that you had is when you had your cancer journey, and with your blessing, we can dive a little bit deeper
Sure.
into it. It seemed like a diagnostic, obviously, with, and I might butcher the name of it, so you might want to correct me, acrolentinous melanoma.
That's pretty good. Yeah, acral lentiginous melanoma. Yeah, you did a great job.
All right, pretty good, pretty good. When you're thinking about kind of like the challenge of, obviously, the treatment where it is to have cancer, and I suppose how you found the strengths and meaning in that suffering. Can you tell me more about how you were able to embrace pain and as a tool for growth at that specific moment?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the word meaning, and I think that's really the underlying, the underpinning of all this. Being able to find meaning in your misery. We're all going to have bad things happen to us in our life, but being able to find a reason, to find a purpose. I mentioned my father was dying of cancer when I graduated from college, and I had some great opportunities to sort of lay in bed with him and talk to him as he was dying and things like that, about what was important in life. And one of the big things he impressed upon me was the importance of purpose. We all need to have a purpose in life. We all do have a purpose in life, but especially when you get a terminal diagnosis. And I did. In 2012, I was told I'd probably be dead in 2 years. And I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can try to turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And Sam, I'll tell you this, 100% this absolutely happened. I went through all the stages that we would associate with grief. First it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then it was anger. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed. And so there was sort of a bargaining with God. Hey, God, please let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got down, got depressed, felt sorry for myself. But then I came out the other end with basically the philosophy of this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I do not like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And part of that was, what is my purpose now? I really haven't worked in almost 13 years because of my disease. So what do I do? Can I talk to groups and explain what I've learned? Can I write books or chapters in books and things like that? That has become my purpose based on where I am in terms of my physical health.
Yes. And in talking about book, that's a perfect segue, actually. I was able to preview Sustainable Excellence, which is kind of like your understanding and some of your principles for an extraordinary lives. I'd love if you can unpack some of, obviously, the principles, the 10 principles actually within that book. When you're thinking about, I suppose, these principles and how they provide a foundations for personal growth, for resilience, and how they are, I suppose, a bridge to the own suffering like you were experiencing. When you're thinking about, I suppose, the significance of that, not only of life itself, but as the understanding in which you sometimes need to fail in order to understand just the sheer value of success. Tell us more about those principles one by one so we can unpack them, please.
Sure. So let me grab so it's been 4 years since I wrote the book. The principles were, first of all, I never expected to write a book, never wanted really to write a book. But it was, and I have a very strong faith in God, and I think God has done this in my life, where He's put enough people in my path that start making the same suggestion over and over again. You should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book. And I think I'm old enough and wise enough, I guess, at this point in my life, that when that happens, I kind of perk up a little bit. Like, I need to pay attention to what's going on here. So sustainable excellence was, I had a young man, let me just sort of give you the background. I had a young man reach out to me on social media, and he said, what do you think are the most important things that I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And Sam, I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we already know. So I had some time, and I started writing some notes, taking notes, and I had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, and these 10 principles. And so I sat back and I was like, okay, after I sent him to him, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So part of my cancer journey involved having my left leg amputated because of the disease. And while I was recovering during that 4 to 5 month period, I sat down at the computer and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how the book came to be. But I'll just read you from every chapter is a principle, or every principle is a chapter, however you want to look at it in that. So here we go. Principle number 1, enjoy your life. Principle number 2, most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I know I've done that in my life. Principle number 3, you were born to live an uncommon and extraordinary life. Principle 4, always remain curious and ask questions. Number 5, you are the person you're looking to become. Number 6, put your God and your family before everything else in your life. Number 7, be part of something that's bigger than yourself. Number 8, and this is going to sound kind of weird, fail often, especially when you're young. Number 9, listen more than you talk. And number 10, love is the most important word in any language.
Wow. That's powerful stuff. I want to rebound on a couple of those because there's I think a few of them that really defines who you are as a person. First thing that struck me, and we were talking about this offline before this podcast, but it's curiosity, right? You strike me not only from what I was able to see online, but just from myself experiencing you for a few minutes now, as an extremely curious person. Why do you think that is in your personal character? But I suppose tell us more about just the sheer importance of being curious in all things in life.
Yeah, that was one thing when I was a hostage negotiator on the SWAT team. We were taught to be curious. What did that person say? Or what didn't they say? Or how did they say it? And kind of not necessarily challenge them on it, but always be curious. And you and I, as you mentioned, we're talking prior to jumping on the recording about the kind of things that we enjoy. And I mentioned to you that one of the categories of books that I love immensely is biographies. I love to know why people do what they do. What was their mindset when they made this major decision that affected history or whatever it ended up being? Because I like to just kind of get inside of people. And that, I think, is what made me a good negotiator. A lot of times we would get on scene and it would be like, we have no idea why we're here. Why did this person grab a gun and barricade themselves or take hostages? And so we would start out with what was called tactical empathy. In other words, help me to understand where you're coming from. The big word there is understand. If you were a homicide suspect that just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to agree with you, but understanding builds trust, and trust gets me to a point where hopefully I can get you out safely.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because even within the sheer concepts of success and failure, one of my obvious favorite quote of all time is by Churchill, which is something around the lines of "Success is not final, failure is not fatal." It's the motivation and I suppose the resilience to continue that matters. When you're thinking about the openness that was necessary for you to not only learn from your personal journey, but also from some of the asset that you had and some of the in some of the profession that you are with, which truly quite arduous work. I mean, being an hostage negotiator is nothing. It's nothing nothing easy at all, nothing simple. I was wondering also how does that tied into, I think it was rule number 7, if I'm not mistaken, which is your sheer love, or I suppose understanding of God or higher purpose, something bigger than yourself. Tell us more when that came from, and I suppose how does that advise every single steps of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a curious person, and I think part of that is because when I was 13 years old, I was 6'5" tall. I had a size 14 shoe, and my ears looked like something out of Dumbo out of a Disney. And I was teased mercilessly because of that. And I learned that if I was going to get through that, I put a lot of my effort into basketball, which got me a scholarship to play in college. But what I ended up doing was, instead of trying to be the person that talked all the time, I was the person that asked the questions. And it is so interesting. My wife is in the financial services industry, and so we would go to the obligatory Christmas party, during December, and I used to play this sort of game with her. I said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into this party, and I'm going to meet 5 of your coworkers, and I'm going to come out at the end of the night, and I'm going to tell you how they met their spouse, how many kids they have, where they went to school, why they went to school, all this kind of stuff." I said, not only that, on Monday morning, they're going to all seek you out and tell you what a great guy I am. But they're not going to be able to tell you one thing about me, because rarely do people reciprocate about, where did you go to school? Well, where did you go to school? How did you meet your wife? Where did you meet your, we love talking about ourselves, and we're narcissistic. And there's a professor at the University of Chicago, psychology professor, who does this experiment with his students. And I absolutely love this. The idea is you go out and you get on a bus, and in 3 questions, he wants you to be deep. with somebody. So you get on a bus, you sit down next to somebody and you're like, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. How are you? Question one. Question two, and I'm just making this up. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a doctor. Okay. Question three, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a veterinarian, but X, Y, and Z happened. Or, my mom was a doctor and she died when she was 40 and I'm being a doctor to honor her. Whatever it ends up, whatever the story is, now you're deep with somebody. And we don't go deep with people. Obviously, as hostage negotiators, you're deep with somebody. I mean, you're in their business. You got to get down in the weeds. And that's what made it so exhausting. I mean, I'll just give you an example, Sam. If somebody is ranting and raving and yelling and screaming, and you say something stupid like, oh, you seem like you're a little upset. Totally. But people did that. You've totally missed the point. No, you've got to say, and I'll, say it's their mother they're upset with. You seem really pissed off at your mother. Yeah, I am pissed off. And again, it goes back to Terry understands me. By understanding me, I am building that trust, and hopefully I can get you out at the end of the night.
Terry, tell me more about why you think that most people fail to go deeply in their interactions. What's typically the main correlation between those who fail to understand the necessity for a more deep, full conversation? Is that anything that you've been able to retrieve information-wise to, I suppose, have a linear process to understand that?
I think a couple of things. I think one, we're narcissistic in nature. We love talking about ourselves. We love, you ask me a million, I'll talk your ear off if you want. But the other thing is I think it boils down to one word, and that word is fear. I'm afraid if I go deep with you. And social media lets us get away with that. We can stay on the surface with people all day long. We can have hour-long conversations and come away not knowing anything about that person or their motives or their values or what they, why they do what they do. It allows us to do that. So it's easy. And I think, oh, it's easy. I had a great conversation with this guy. Really? What did you know about? What do you know about him? I don't really know anything about him. Well, then it was probably a wasted 2 hours of your time if you didn't come away learning something that maybe you can apply in your life, even if it's, boy, I really didn't like that guy. That's not somebody I want to emulate. You can learn how not to do something, how not to, to have a performance review that the guy yelled and screamed or whatever it ends up being. But it's that fear of, am I inadequate? Do I have the life skills? Do I have the meaning? Do I have something that people will care about? And Sam, let me give you one story. There was a nurse when I first started having treatment for the tumors that I currently have in my lungs. And she was a young nurse. She was about 25 years old. And she was learning how to do things on the unit where I was being treated when I first met her. And a few months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I don't know how to tell it to you. And I didn't know how to respond to that. I said, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me the story. He's in and out. And finally she comes in, sits down. She's like, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, now I met you. And I have a really bad reaction to my medicine that I'm given. She said, I see you come back every day, no matter how bad your reaction is. And she said, and then I went back and I looked in your file of everything you've been through during this almost 13-year battle with cancer. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. If she would have never told me that story, Sam, I would have had no idea that my life had an impact on that individual. So who's ever listening to us, if you think your life doesn't matter, I guarantee you there are people out there that are watching how you handle your adversity in life and would give almost anything they have to walk 5 minutes in your shoes.
Right. How does that make you feel? That young person that came to you for some life lessons. Now that lady obviously telling you about just how impactful your story was. How does that make you feel and reflect on the life that you had?
I mean, it certainly honors me. And, because I certainly have felt like, Nobody cares. It doesn't matter. This isn't important and stuff like that. But when she told me that story, it was almost like a light bulb went on. It was like, yes, our lives do matter. I don't care what you do in your life. If you pick up garbage, if you sweep floors, if you're a CEO, if you're an entrepreneur, whatever you do, it matters. People are watching you, and you have so much, I guess, ability to mold people's lives just on what you say, how you say it. And we did the same thing as negotiators. We would stay away, I'll be honest, from why questions. So I might say, well, Sam, what made you decide to wear that today? That's kind of a softer question other than, Sam, why'd you wear that? Oh, wait a minute. Does he not like what I'm wearing? Why questions sound accusatory? How and what questions are much softer that can get you to the same answer? So realizing that you have that ability to shape people just on how you live your life is very humbling.
Oh, it is. It is, and it's. I think a very motivational also on a mindset standpoint because it allows us to overcome challenges. This understanding in which it's, and I love this kind of like this, I wouldn't say paradox, but this way of viewing the world where your own struggles basically will not only advise the person in which you want to become for the life you want to live, but also may inspire others to basically understand what they don't or want out of life, both being very, very important. I think it was Mark Twain saying that an intelligent man learns from his mistake, a wise one learns from others' mistakes, right? And that's a big reason why people like yourself and myself love to read biographies and love to read basically tangible and real people, how they lived their life and how they were able to achieve success, failures, and cultivate resilience, perhaps. When you're thinking about just how big of a deal mindset is and how crucial it is to basically live a purposeful life, can you share some practical strategies that you were able to cultivate within your life to, I suppose, have a sharper and a tougher mindset, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will give your audience this recommendation. I do this every day of my life. Do one thing every day that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle those things than people who never step outside those comfort zones and do things that make them uncomfortable. So what am I talking about? It can be as simple as, and I do this when I take a shower. I turn the water as cold as it possibly can, and I let cold water out. I hate it. It is incredibly uncomfortable, but it also allows me when I have to go for my cancer treatments, and as I expressed, I shake, I throw up, I have all these terrible side effects. It allows me to be strong enough to handle things like that. The other day, I hate going to the dentist. And the other day, I picked up the phone, made an appointment for my 6-month checkup. And I'm sure there's people out there like, oh, that's no big deal. When you hate the dentist as much as I do, yeah, that's a big deal. Things like that. So whatever it is that you don't like, that you hate, that's uncomfortable in your life, set aside some time every day to do that. That will make you stronger and more resilient.
Yeah, and I love that because we live in a world where comfort has never been this accessible, excuse me, which is very. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think there's obviously some great things to say about that, but there's also the obviously every coin has two sides, and the other side of that coin, I suppose, is the fact that a lot of people have a very hard time to step outside their comfort zone. They're so enabled with this kind of like bubble. They're just, hey, let me just stay here. And there's nothing wrong with that, but from my understanding of great people and those who, well, some change the world, but some also just change themselves. I think you don't need to be Elon Musk to be significant to the universe. But I suppose when you're thinking about how practical ways, and I suppose insights on how people can step outside their comfort zone in a way in which makes them it's just enough discomfort so they can grow, but not to a point where they never want to do that anymore. I think it's kind of like a fine line. I love just going a cold shower once in a while. First of all, it's good for you, right? It's great for your health. We know that. but it's also a place where you'll get your immune system up. You'll get your synapses to say, "Whoa, what the hell is this?" And by by kind of like debalancing yourself, you can learn a lot from that. One question that I had for you specifically is when you take a look at your story, what was your why when you're thinking about just the sheer resilience to go through everything that you've been going in this understanding of having something bigger than yourself? What was your personal why that kept you going and grow within those challenges?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to bring faith into it, especially during my cancer journey, has been basically, people are well, why did you get cancer? How did you get cancer? So I've had all 88 genes tested that doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we're aware of. And yet I have no mutations in any of my genes that would predispose me to cancer. So why did I get this disease? Nobody's ever been able to answer that question. Why I got it? I got it. I mean, I had my foot amputated in 18. I had my leg amputated in 20. I got tumors in my lungs. I got it. There's no doubt that I have it. But then it's, why do I have it? And for me, it's come down to a point where I've asked God, or I think God is using me, my infirmity, my malignancy, to show other people his love, his mercy, his goodness. Because, as I said, I was supposed to be dead 10 years ago. And yet I'm still here. There's still a reason I'm here. And I remember my doctor showed me my CAT scan results after I had my leg amputated and had these tumors in my lungs. And Sam, I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan. But you could kind of look at it and be like, oh, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I mean, I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. And without being too gross, I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive during that period? And Sam, I'll never forget this. My doctor put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me, God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. I think God is using me to help other people live better lives.
Purpose through God is so powerful, and however you want to quantify, or I suppose what image you have of God, this understanding in which you can have somebody, energy that is looking for you in your deepest moments is truly an idea in which we have for thousands of years now. So I mean, it's nothing new. I don't think it's not going anywhere either. And truly, for me at least, it's kind of like this understanding of, again, when nobody believes in yourself, and even perhaps yourself has lost faith with you as a person, God can be there, obviously, to support you and to be an ally in your story. When you were you always part of a religious kind of like family and environment? Is that where that basically came from?
Yeah, we used to joke. I mentioned I'm 6'8". I've got a brother 6'7", a brother 6'6", and my dad was 6'5". So if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on at the front of the church. And that,
Yeah.
but yeah, faith has always been a huge part of my life.
Yeah, and faith is again, it's such a beautiful way, and it's expressed in many different ways. But I think it always come back to this understanding of purpose, this understanding of, and purpose is a beautiful word. Actually, my mother tongue is French, and we don't have a very good translation actually for purpose. It's quite unique to the English language in that sense, and which is why it's one of my favorite words. Periods. And because period is bridging, in my belief, the intangible and the tangibles is something that we can all basically see in actions. When somebody is in purpose, on purpose, we see that very strikingly, but it's quite intangible in the sense that a lot of what gives us purpose for many people, like God, for example, is something that we cannot see, or at least touch directly. It's not something like physically you cannot touch it. When you're thinking about, I suppose, that battle And I love this new book by Jordan Peterson, We Will Wrestle with God, which I'm sure you'll pick it up for. It's probably right up your alley. It's have you ever, I suppose, I wouldn't say suffer, but learn from these wrestling matches with God and within yourself? How was your faith, I suppose, unfolding through those moments?
Yeah, there was a point after I was diagnosed where I was told that I would be dead in 2 years, where my doctor put me on a drug called interferon. And I took a weekly interferon injection. And the side effects of that medication were that I had terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And there was a point, Sam, where I was so sick of being sick that I prayed to die. That it was like, come on, God, just I'm, there was sort of the living camp and the not dying camp. And I was definitely in the not dying camp. I really didn't feel I was living. I wasn't working. I didn't feel I was contributing to the family in any way. So there was come on, God, take me out of this. Be done. Let my family, let them mourn and then let them get on with their lives and get on doing what they're supposed to do, finding their purpose, living their purpose. But God obviously didn't do that for me. He didn't honor what I wanted. It was, no, I can use you. I can use your infirmity. I can have you go on podcasts and write books that people look at you and like, you don't look like you're sick. Like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sick. Well, if you can do it, maybe I can do it as well. And I would say, and that's absolutely true, I had the biggest wimp in the world. I mean, when I was a little kid and I'd have to go to the pediatrician to get a vaccine, I would wait till my mom got out of the car and then I'd lock all the doors from the inside. And so it was kind of a cat and mouse game. She had to get the pediatrician and his nurse to come out because there was no key fobs back then. You actually had to put a key in the door to unlock it because I hated getting a shot so much. And now I'm constantly stuck with needles all the time. But I use that pain, I use that discomfort as a way to honor God and as a way to make me a stronger person.
Yes. And it's interesting because you're talking about some of, obviously you have speaking engagements as well, which is a big part of your I suppose modern lives, and also podcast preparation like this one. When you're thinking about I suppose ways in which you want to contribute to the world through your own story, is it fair to say that your objective is to I suppose share it as long as you can, and hopefully as it many decades down the road as well, and just trying to, I suppose, encompass what's most important for it to impact as many lives as possible. How big of a how much do you ask yourself the question of how can I get on more podcasts? Or I suppose what's your plan to distribute this message to as much people as possible in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly podcasts. I mean, I am unfortunately at the discretion of my cancer treatment. When I'm treated every 3 weeks at the hospital for an entire week. So I'm really I don't do anything during that week. And then I get 2 weeks off before I have to do it over again. So I'm really limited on the window that I have that I can get out there and do things. And so podcasting has been something that really kind of came to me sort of by accident. I had started a school security, or excuse me, I had started a public speaking business on what I learned from my journeys. And then COVID hit and everything shut down. Nobody was doing anything in person or even virtually. And a friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey, Terry, would you like to be a guest on my podcast?" And Sam, this is the honest truth. I said, "Sure." What's a podcast? I had absolutely no idea what a podcast was, but he explained it to me and I thought, okay, I'll try it. And Sam, I was horrible at my first podcast. I had provided no value. I had posted notes all around the camera and he'd ask me a question and I'd kind of lean in and read one of the posts. And I was terrible. But then I thought, and like so many people in life, the first time I drove a car, I wasn't any good at it. The first time I made a meal, I think I burned the water. You can't burn. Anyway, I mean, the first time I studied algebra, I wasn't good at it, but I liked it. And so how do you get good at it? You work at it. You find how many times you say or those filler words. You find better stories to use to go on to the podcast so that the host feels it was time well spent and the audience feels you provided value. So however many podcasts, I mean, and I've probably been on 700 podcasts all around the world, which is great. I mean, I've never had a bad experience. Maybe I'll be on another 700. Maybe I'll speak, in a big football center. I don't know. I just leave myself open to whatever I think God wants me to do.
I love that. One thing that is interesting to me is when you're thinking about now this huge purpose of yours, which is to distribute your story in order to inspire, in order to obviously change life through it. How much does that have a ripple effect about on your own happiness, right? When you explore kind of like the intersections of what I want to do, what the world wants me to do, what I suppose is expecting from me, and be able to be on purpose in order to deliver such value. I feel like yours is right on the money, as as my good Canadian friend would like to say. When you're perhaps thinking of just again the ripple effect of that, how does that shape your life within that very strict schedule of yours?
Yeah, absolutely, and it affects it a lot because you never know whose life you're going to touch. And it may be as simple as I'm sitting in the waiting room waiting to be called back for my treatment, and there's a person sitting there kind of like, a deer in headlights. They're scared, they're nervous, this is their first time there. And can you just go up and say, how's it going? How you doing? Just, hey, I see you. You're a human being. I know you're scared. I know you, but I've been here for 4 years and I know that these people are going to take care of you and you're going to be okay. So just finding those avenues. About 6 months ago, I had a young man reach out to me on my website and he said, I just listened to the podcast you did and it really touched me. I needed to hear it right now. And I said, great. I said, what was the name of the podcast? And he gave it to me. And Sam, I didn't remember it. It was like, I didn't remember the name of the podcast. I had to go back and look it up. And it was a podcast I had done at one episode on this person's podcast that I did 2.5 years ago. And this person needed to hear it, found it, and listened to it on that day. So the things that you're doing, the things that I'm doing, these things are evergreen. These things are out there and will be out there for decades, if not even longer after we're gone. And that's really what's important to me. It's not making money. It's the relationships. It's the connections that I make in my life. 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember I was ever here. But what I hope people remember now are the relationships I have. And I hope that, as you say, kind of ripples out based on the people they come in contact with or their family members or their friends or wherever it ends up being. I've learned something from Terry, and now that can continue to ripple out through life.
Beautiful. One thing I want to talk to you about tonight and struck me alongside our conversation is your leadership ability. Truly magnificent display of a timeless understanding that leadership is not only about being in charge, but it's also about taking care of those in your charge. That's systemic. If I'm not if I'm not mistaken. When you're thinking about, again, the leadership abilities that is necessary for you to go up to that person that very, very visibly is not very comfortable with her getting in the treatment room or whatever it is, or even to serve that young gentleman that is going to you to ask you for advice. I suppose how can leaders and inspiring leaders be more open-minded toward this understanding that actually you can learn from anyone at any time if you just have the right perspective, the right mindset towards it. Tell me more about just how you were able to do that for yourself, but some of the people around you as well.
Sure. So I'll tell you a story, and you've probably experienced this in your life as well. We've all been, kind of, there's a problem at work, whatever that ends up being, and you're all sitting around a conference table, and the boss comes in, and the boss sits down and says, "Okay, here's the problem," and kind of outlines the problem for you. Now, this can go one of two ways. The way it goes a lot of the time is then the boss says, well, I think we should do X, Y, and Z to solve the problem. But I want to hear what the rest of you say. And so you go around the table. Now, unless you want to commit suicide, you're not going to say anything different than what the boss said. You're going to find a way to repurpose what he or she said and give it right back to them. A better way, especially for bosses, and I'll give you a sort of a police story that illustrates this, is to come in, sit down, outline the problem as you see it, and then be quiet and say, okay, I want to go around the room and I want to hear what the rest of you think. One, is the problem, and two, how we can handle the problem. Okay, great. Now people are like, yeah, I want to hey, I'm real close to this problem. Here's what I see and here's what I think. Great. New perspectives, new ideas, not just the boss's idea, everybody's idea. And I'll never forget, I was a sergeant one day, and the captain, the guy who ran the district where I worked, came to me and he said, Terry, read this use of force. And there was a 911 call to dispatch that said there's a woman, and they gave her description, sitting on a convertible car at this location waving a gun around. Like, okay. So 3 cars get dispatched. They get there. They see the car. They see the woman matching the description. They don't see a gun, but they take cover and they order her to get out and get down on the ground so they can handcuff her and find the gun. Well, she won't do that. So they tase her. They use a taser on her to disable her and handcuff her. And the captain's like, why didn't they just walk up on her? And I remember thinking, oh my God, Captain, it's a gun run. If she had a gun, what's to prevent her from going bang, bang, bang? And now we're going to 3 different cops' funerals. I said, I think that was tactically a very sound thing to do. You ask somebody, you tell them to do it, you order them to do it, and then when they don't do it, you move up the chain of use of force. And for us, it was verbal commands and then taser. They verbally commanded her. She didn't do it. They tased her. I'm like, sir, this is textbook. It doesn't get any better than this. He couldn't understand why they didn't just walk up on her. And that's I'm like, I almost wanted to say to him, sir, you need to get out on the street. You spend too much time behind the desk. You don't understand what goes on.
You're out of touch. Yeah.
You're totally out of touch on that. Yeah.
Do you think that occur often within that industry, and I suppose within all industry, where there's just this kind of like bureaucracy, where I suppose these people in charge, in which are completely disconnected from the people that actually do the work, and therefore have such a disconnected understanding of what need to occur or should occur instead of what actually, what should occur instead of what need to occur?
I think it can be, and I've seen that. I've seen captains that spend 1 day a week out on the street. They're taking radio runs, they're backing up people and things like that. They get it. They understand it. They're living the same life that their officers are. Whereas the ones that are sitting behind a desk pushing paper, from one side of the desk to the other, they don't get it. They don't understand it. So I think it depends on, and you can do that. You're a captain. You're running the district. You could decide, you know what, I'm going to set aside 1 day a week to go out and run a beat, or, back up other officers, or just get out there and drive around and see what's going on, see what kind of things are happening so that you're plugged in, and not somebody had a use of force and I'm going to read about it on a piece of paper. I want to understand what's going on out there. I never made it to captain, but at least as a sergeant, I spent a lot of time pushing paper, but I spent at least a couple hours every night out on the street, going to different runs and backing up the men and women I was responsible for.
Right. There's theory, and then there's practice, right? To a certain extent, you can have all the theory in the world, what occur in the real world, especially within those quite, I suppose, arduous and also jobs in which, like you said, that it can be a live deciding decisions of just saying, hey, do I tease her or I don't, or I just run to her even though she might have a gun. Those are quite simple actions, but they're actually very, very important in the sake of the consequence that might occur through them. And I think there's a lot of wisdom through that. Another thing you talk a lot about, Terry, which I definitely want to go deeper with, is you talk about this concept of finding significance over success a lot during everything that I've been able to see. Tell me more about what you make of the distinction between those two words to start with.
Yeah. So, when I wrote Sustainable Excellence, I felt it was a book about success, about how somebody based on things I've learned in my life, could be successful in life. And Sam, almost immediately after publishing that book, I kind of felt like I got to write another book. And that is another book that also starts with a word that starts with the letter S, and that is a book about significance. Success is what we do for us. Significance is what we do to make a positive difference in the lives of other people. Now, don't get me wrong. I think you can be both. I think you can be successful and significant in people's lives at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And I literally am kind of wrapping up this second book now that I hope will be more about significance. And now I feel I've got a good, kind of two books, one about success, one about significance. And that makes me feel a whole lot better.
Sure. And tell us when that book is published. By the way, I'll definitely grab a copy.
Thank you.
When you're thinking about some of obviously the insights, so that basically people can align their actions with their values, because that's truly what I think significance is. To a certain extent, when you're out of touch with your values, you can be quite successful doing that. Or actually, in a way we view success, right? You can make a lot of money. You can be somebody that is famous. Whatever success might I suppose mean for you. But you can't really have any significance, because at that point, if you're out of touch with your value, you'll be misaligned, you'll be mispurposed, and therefore perhaps it will be very hard to cultivate a meaningful living. In your observations, not only your life, but also everybody else that you were able to surround yourself with, what are some, I suppose, actionable items and actions you can do to try to align your actions with your values a little bit better, so that the meaning of what you're trying to accomplish is amplified?
That's a great question. And I think one of the big things you got to do is understand your values. What are your values? Values I look at as sort of foundational. They're the bedrock. They're not going to move no matter what happens in your life, no matter, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're up or down, whether the family's good, whether it's not. Those things are foundational. They're your rock. They're not going to move. And then you hitch your life to those values, and kind of, it's almost like a safety line. That's my value. I know it. I'm going to tie my life off, and then I'm going to go figure out what I'm going to do with my life. There was and Sam, you may be too young for this. Do you know who Mr. Rogers was? Fred Rogers? Probably not. Okay. So when I was growing up, there was a television personality by the name of Fred Rogers. And he had a television show, and actually there was a movie made about his life, and Fred Rogers was played by Tom Hanks, the actor. And when Fred Rogers died, and he educated so many people, including me, on public television when we were little and growing up. When he died in 2003, his family was going through his effects, and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper with 4 simple words written on it. Life is for service. And I think that's so powerful. Sam, you and I have probably seen people that think they're born empty, and that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like for them, then their job is to fill up their empty self. I got to make the most money. I got to live in the nicest house, drive the nicest car, have the latest gadgets and gizmos. And Sam, what I found is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful already inside of us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it for our benefit. So our job in life should not be to fill ourselves up. Our job in life should be to empty ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves, but also for the betterment of our families, our friends, and our communities.
Beautiful. It's so interesting, because the happiest people that I ever come across, and mind you, I go to conference and so on, billionaires are there, people that build incredible companies, that have thousands of employees. That's fantastic. But one thing I found, and maybe it's because of my age and just the curiosity, so they open up to me. They don't feel like I'm a threat that much. That might be a reason why. But one thing I found is there's a very, very poor correlation with the modern definition of success and happiness. Very, very poor correlations. Some of the most successful, quote-unquote, people that I ever come across, monetarily speaking, are actually some of the saddest people that I ever come across. And that disconnection, I think, is is something that we ought to talk more about. Not because you should not seek to have more resources, you should definitely seek to do such things, but in a way in which is not to the detriment of your values and your significance. I think those can serve as parameters just for the sake of the conversations, because like you said very wisely, you can obviously be very successful and very significant, even though that's extremely rare. I can count the people that I come across that were able to master these two parameters probably on my two hands. And perhaps that just raises questions just right away from talking about it. Why do you think it's that rare, actually? Why do you think that most people believe that they ought to compromise one or the other in order to, I suppose, aspire to what they believe a meaningful life is? Do you have anything that comes to mind on why such thing occur?
I would say they don't know their values. They don't know what's important in their life, and it's not money. There's a great story. It's more of a fable about Alexander the Great, probably the greatest conqueror ever. And the story goes like this: at the end of his life, he's dying, and he calls his counselors, his advisors together, and he says, "I want you to basically carry out my final three wishes. The first wish is I want my doctors, and only my doctors, to carry my coffin to the grave. The second wish is I want the road to the cemetery paved with gold and silver and precious stones. And the third wish is I want my hands hanging out of my coffin." And one of his advisors steps forward and says, "Excuse me, you're Alexander the Great. You're the most powerful man in the world right now. You could have anything you want. These seem like," my words, not his, "kind of goofy wishes or things you want us to do. Why do you want us to do this?" He said, "Number one, I want my doctors to carry my coffin to the grave because I want people to understand that no doctor cures anyone. They just help the body to cure itself. So be very cognizant of how you treat yourself. Are you exercising? Are you not smoking? Are you eating right? Be very careful of those kind of things. Secondly," he said, "I spent my entire life conquering, accumulating wealth and power and influence, and none of that is coming with me beyond the grave. I want people to understand that pursuing wealth, power, and importance is sheer folly. And thirdly, I want my hands hanging out of my casket because I want people to understand I came into this world empty-handed and I leave it the same way."
Wow. Try not to become a man of success, but rather a man of value. Mr. Terry Tucker, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast to share some of your wisdoms, insights, and just extraordinary life stories. I would absolutely adore if you could share some last words of wisdoms with our audience, please.
Sure, I'll leave you a quote. You and I think, are kind of cut out of the same mold. We enjoy reading. Ernest Hemingway was one of our most prolific authors here in the United States, wrote back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms, which is a semi-autobiographical account of his time as an ambulance driver for the Italian army during World War I. And there's a line in that book, Sam, that I absolutely love. And the line is this: "Life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places." So just like if you were to break your arm and a doctor would set it and put it in a cast, when that arm heals, it'll be stronger at the area where it was broken than the rest of your arm will be. That's a metaphor for life. We're all going to have bad things happen to us, horrible things happen to us in our life. But if you can keep moving forward, if you can keep putting one foot in front of the other, you will come out the other end of that a stronger and more determined individual.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.